do this. Tonight, shiur, as always, Lilu Nishma Ravi Marido, Ber Meir Ben Ruven Halevi, Imi Marati, Rachel Bat Harav Michael, and also that it should be Lilu Nishmat. I don't know her name. Vivian Skolnick, whose first yard side is tonight. I don't remember her Hebrew name. I forgot to look it up. And it should be Lizachut, all of the Chayalim, Chayalot who are out there, and that Hashem should watch over them, and Hashem should also protect and guard over all of the Shivuyim, and they should come home soon safely. Okay, having said all that, we will begin with this week's parsha. Now, interestingly enough, this week's parsha begins the shift is the next stage of parshat Bereshit, of a Sefer Bereshit, which will basically take us till the end of Sefer Bereshit in terms of storyline, in terms of major characters. Up until now, we've had Adam, we've had Noach, we've had Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, all have taken center stage and moved on. This week finds the shift of the center stage from Yaakov to his sons, but the primary driver in the story going the rest of the way is going to be Yosef, is the major one, and the minor one is his brothers, led specifically by Yehuda. The parsha focuses, of course, the stories we well know, the sale of Yosef by his brothers to Egypt, and then before we read about Yosef's arrival in Egypt and what happens to him there, the Torah interrupts with this story. This is what we're going to talk about tonight. This is Perek Lamed Chet, chapter 38 in Bereshit. And we're not going to get very far in this story because it's a very interesting story that could take, a significant amount of time to try to delve through it. We're going to try to hit a couple of points in the story, primarily focusing on the aspect of why the story is here and what are the lessons we're supposed to learn from it. But before we get into that, we're going to get into a different topic of the wives of Yaakov's sons. So first, I want to read the story, just really the beginning, and hit a few high points, and then we're going to try to discuss a few of the topics that, as I said, we're going to get into. So the parsha, again, as I said, the last story we read immediately before that talks about the sale of Yosef, how the brothers come to Yaakov and they say they've, quote, found this coat that they've put bloodstains on, and they ask him to recognize the coat, and he says, oh, this is Yosef's coat. Something terrible must have happened to him. He doesn't know what's happened to him. Immediately after we read that story, it tells us, it came to pass at that time, Vayered Yehuda me'et Achav, that Yehuda went down from amongst his brothers. Vayet ad ish Adulami, he turned to a man from Adulam, Ushmo Chira, whose name was Chira. That's the intro to this whole story about what's going to happen to Yehuda after he leaves his brothers temporarily, because later in the story we're going to see that he's back with the brothers, but at least at this point he seems to leave his brothers for a period of time. Vayar Sham Yehuda bat Ish Kanani Ushmo Shua. Yehuda sees there the daughter of a Ish Kanani. I'm not going to translate that yet. Ushmo Shua. I mean, simply it means a Canaanite man who had a daughter whose name was Shua. Presumably the Ish Kanani's name was Shua rather than the daughter. At least that's the impression we get. What? Ushmo, yes, his name was Shua. And he takes her to be his wife by Avoila, and he obviously marries her. Batara Teled Ben, she comes pregnant, has a son. By Shmo Er, he calls his name Er. He has a second son. She calls his name Onant. He has a third son, and she calls his name Shelah. By the way, it's very interesting because many have the custom based on these three psukim that we just read in terms of who gets to pick the name for a child. Okay, it says Vayikra, he called his name, the first one, Yehuda gets to pick the name. The second one, Batikra, she picks the name. And the third one, she picks the name, but the only reason that she picks the name is Vayabich Sibli Toto. Because, again, literal translation means that he was not in town when the baby was born, so therefore she got to pick the name. So there's a whole liturgy written about a whole litany of Shelot and Shuvot written about who gets to pick names, all based on these three psukim. Who gets to pick first, second, third, etc. Today, I think a little more amicable. Most people generally agree on a name. Yes or no, one way or the other, in terms of naming children. But I think it's just interesting sidelight to the whole story. Now, Yehuda, after a period of time, decides that his oldest son, Er, is ready to get married. He picks a wife. Her name is Tamar. Er God doesn't like something that he's done. He dies. Yehuda says to Onan, very importantly, Yehuda is somehow aware that there is this concept of levirate marriage, what we call yibum, and he tells Onan, the brother of the childless son who has died, heir, that he is supposed to take his wife. Onan says, no way, he's not interested. God kills him also. And Yehuda now realizes that, wait a minute, I'm not sure if it's my son's fault or the woman's fault. She's potentially that she is somebody who all her husbands are going to die. I better be careful. So he sends her back home, and says, when Shayla grows up, we'll talk about it. Some time passes. Batshua, daughter of Yehuda, dies. Yehuda, to find comfort, he goes to the sheep shearing with his friend Chira, the Adulamite person. He goes to Timnah. Okay. Now Tamar finds out in verse 13. So no, he's going up to Timnah. She dresses herself up, or she removes her widow's garments, and she covers herself up, and she sits at the crossroads, which is on the way to Timnah, because she has seen she realized that Shelah has become of age, and she's waiting to marry him, and he hasn't been offered by Yehuda, so she doesn't know what to say. She presumably wants to confront her father-in-law to find out what's going on. Yehuda, when Yehuda sees her at the crossroads, he thinks that she's a zonah. Because her face was covered. She was covered with a tza'if. I guess women weren't out on the streets back in those days at street corners. If there was, they must have been a lady of the night. So now, one of the things we have to understand when we read this story is that the whole concept of how we engage in sexual relations is based on the Torah, and this is before the Torah was given. The laws are completely different, so we got to be careful how we judge the characters and what's going on here. So Yehuda goes over to her. Hey, you're a lady of the night. Let's have a fling here. He did not recognize her as his daughter-in-law. But Tomer Matita, she asks, okay, what are you willing to pay me? He says, okay, I'll send you a sheep. I know Shalach Zimin Atzon. But Tomer, but she says, oh, that's good. That's a fine price, but you have to give me some type of guarantee. Give me some guarantee that you'll pay. What do you want? But Tomer, she asks for chotamcha, your seal, tilecha, your signet, and your staff. He gives it to her. She goes. She goes back to home and puts back her normal clothes that she was wearing. Yehuda says, okay, I got to pay her, right? I agreed to pay her. He sends the goat that he wanted to pay her with, with his friend, the Adulamite, to take to retrieve his deposit. The lo mitzah, however, his friend obviously doesn't find her because she's left and gone home. We know that. Obviously, his friend didn't know that. He just didn't know where she was. Yehuda told her, you'll find her right there. She's waiting presumably for the payment, and didn't find her. He asks the whoever he saw in the neighborhood, asked them, where is there was a Kadesh, there was a harlot standing here at this crossroads. Where is she? Vayomer, and all the people said, "Lo haytzav ezek deisha." We don't know what you're talking about. Leave us alone. We don't. This is not a red light district. Don't bother us. Leave us alone. What do you think this is? We're running here. Vayayshev el Yehuda vayomer lo mitzatil. He turns to it and says, "I couldn't find her." V'gam anshem hakom amru lo haytzav ezek deisha. The people place it. No, what are you talking about? There was nobody here. Vayomer Yehuda tikach la. Yehuda says, "Well, we tried to take her penny elavuz. I'm not going to go again and embarrass myself." So I tried to pay up, didn't find her. Okay. Obviously, Yehuda completely forgets about, or somehow, didn't give that much importance to the fact that he's just given her his signet, his ring, and his staff. So obviously, he forgot all about that. It wasn't that important. So suddenly, what happens now? Approximately 3 months pass. She has your daughter-in-law Tamar has committed harlotry. Now, why is she committed harlotry? Wait a minute, she's a widow. She's a single lady, but because Yehuda still has a son alive, she is considered bound to him by the laws of levirate marriage. It appears that is even though we only know about it from the Torah, from later, and we don't learn about the whole concept of Yibum until late in the Torah. It's one of the last topics discussed in Sefer Devarim. Yet it appears that this was something that was already known. This whole concept of that you have to keep the widow within the family, you have to redeem her, redeem the brother who's died, seems to have been something that was so well established that the fact that even though she was a widow, she was still considered partially married. So that the fact that she has had affairs, she's pregnant, has had an affair with somebody else, is considered harlotry. Very interesting. The Gaminero Lizunim, she has obviously had an affair and is pregnant. By Yom Yehuda, it says Tisaref, take her out and she should be burned. Now, two different opinions of what Tisaref is. Most of the commentaries say that he being the patriarch of the family is the one who sentences her to judgment, and the sentence is death by burning. Others want to say no, that she is it doesn't Tisaref mean she has to get a brand, branded as harlotry or whatever, as was the custom in some places. Whatever it is, Himutze, when she is sent out, she sends a messenger to her father-in-law telling him, the person who is the father of these children is the owner of these items. But she says, I want you to please recognize who do these things belong to. Obviously, she presents her evidence as who the father is. Vayaker Yehuda, when Yehuda recognizes these things, he says, she is more righteous than I am, because she approached me incognito, because I'm the one at fault for not giving her to my son Shelah. And again, Lo Yosef either means he did not have relations with her again, or he then took her as a full wife and continued keeping her as his wife. Two different opinions, both ends of the spectrum as to what Lo Yosef means. Well, Lo Yosef means he didn't continue or he didn't stop, and there are proofs to both in the usage of the term. And then the Torah tells us that when she gives birth, there were twins, and the first one is named Peretz, and the second one is named Zoach, and that's the end of the story. And then we go back to Yosef's story, exactly where we picked off. The next verse after this is Vayayshev who Rad Mitzrayim. Yosef goes down to Egypt. Now, the reason I wanted to bring the whole story is because I think the whole story is here in its entirety, and there are a number of challenges we're going to have in trying to understand the overall story. As I said, if I go through each of these individual events, there's lots to be learned from that too, but that's not where I'm going to go tonight, because otherwise we wouldn't finish tonight. But I'm going to go in a different direction. So we're going to first start with the question that I started with, and that is the wives of the tribes. Before I do that, Maurice has a question. Go ahead. Yes. Okay, wait. I just want to repeat what you just said. One of the two children that she bare, one is Peretz, and Peretz is the progenitor of the Davidic line. So we need to understand that. Go ahead. Yes, who was the father? Who was David's grandfather? Yes, correct. Okay, what the commentary there is saying, Maurice then quotes, continue. The commentary says that we find a very similar case of a pseudo-levirate marriage between Boaz and Ruth. Also, Boaz is, by the way, a direct descendant of this Peretz, so we just read about his birth. Boaz is a direct descendant of Peretz, okay? And Ruth, as we read in the book of Ruth, concludes a semi-levirate marriage with him. Again, both of these are critical components in the building of the Davidic line, which ultimately will lead to the Mashiach. So yes, that's important to know. I wasn't going to get to that till a little bit later, but yeah, we're going to see commentaries are going to focus on that in terms of this. Okay, so yes, that's very good that you point that out. But we're going to go first, before we go and try to understand why this story is here, I want to go very briefly into a different question, not simply the question of the wives of the tribes. Who did the tribes marry? And which I think is very important, because if we think about it, if we, the Jews, are descended from the 12 tribes, it's nice to know who our male ancestors are. We'd also like to know, where did the females come from? Okay, so we're going to start with Rashi. Rashi says a very interesting comment. This, by the way, is back in the story when after Yosef is sold. It says in the pasuk, "Vayakumu kol banav v'chol benotav l'nachamo," that all of Jacob's sons and his daughters, plural, tried to console him. Okay. Now Rashi, on that comment of all his daughters, brings down the following midrash. Rabbi Yehuda says, "Achiyot te'omot noldo im kol shevet v'shevet." Each of the 12 tribes, okay, when they were born, was born with a twin sister. Every one of the 12 tribes was a twin, and they had a twin sister. The exception is Dinah, who is not a twin. She didn't have a twin brother. But there were 12 sons who had 12 twin sisters. Vinas and those 12 sisters are the 12 wives of the 12 tribes. Okay? Now you say, wait a minute, married their sisters? Wait a minute, that doesn't work out, right? But in reality, and we're going to see this later on among the commentaries, they each married only a half sister, because remember, Leah has 6 children. The other 3 wives have 2 children each, make 6. So the six brothers of Leah, 6 sons of Leah, married the 6 daughters of the other 3. The 6 of the other 3 married the 6 daughters of Leah. So everybody was marrying only a half brother through their father, not through their mother. That's going to become very important, as we're going to see later on when we go through the parshanim. Okay? Now that's only one opinion. That's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Okay? Rabbi Nehemiah's opinion is completely different. He says, no, Kanaaniyot hayu, that the women that were married by the tribes were Canaanim. They were the native population. Who else was there to marry? They didn't have any other daughters. There was nobody else to marry. Okay? So if that's the case, wait a minute. We just said that all of Yaakov's sons and daughters, plural. Now, according to Nehemiah, there's only one daughter. Why does it say all his sons and his daughters? Elobal b'chol benotav kalotav, all his daughters-in-law. So in other words, he had all these daughters-in-law, he had all these sons, all these daughters-in-laws. She'ein adam nimna milikro lechatno beno ulekalato bito. Very important that it's not something new that we call our in-law children our children. This is an ancient, it's been going on for centuries. Okay, that's what Rashi wants to. Person doesn't say, "Oh, my daughter-in-law," it's my daughter. Okay, very interesting. Okay, so that's one comment. Now we get to Yehuda. Okay, now you remember I said at the beginning, it says, Bat Ish Kanaani. Again, the son of a Kanaani. Now Rashi is quoting, of course, takes Targum Onkelos. He says the following: what does Kanaani mean in this pasuk? It doesn't mean a Canaanite. Don't think that it means that Yehuda married the daughter of a Canaanite man. It means a Tigra, a trader, a tradesman, a merchant who happened to be among the local population, but he lived there because he was a trader who came from some other nationality. Doesn't say what nationality, but he's not, Kanani here is not intended to mean a Canaanite. Okay? That's Rashi says. And then Tzimtzei Chachamim says, wait a minute, where does Rashi come up to say that Kanani doesn't mean Kanani, a Canaanite? That doesn't make sense. Bim Tomar, I'm going to ask a question. Minale Rashi, where does Rashi get the idea that Kanani doesn't mean Canaanite? Dilma Kanani Mamish. The Yesh Lomer, and his answer is very simple. Does that ain't no? It's impossible. Because we found what? Sha'avram lo yarotz latzi Yitzchak Kanani. That Yitzchak should not marry a Canaanite woman. Right? He sends his servant all the way back to Haran to make sure he doesn't marry a Canaanite. And Yitzchak commanded Yaakov not to marry a Canaanite woman. It doesn't say you can't marry an idolater, but you can't marry Canaanite women. And certainly his sons would have been equally cognizant and concerned about marrying a Canaanite woman. The Im Tomar, but wait a minute. Before the Rashi that we just quoted, Haliel Perish Rashi, Rabbi Nechemia, Omer Kananiot Hayu. Rabbi Nechemia, one opinion in the Talmud is that these women were Canaanites. So how can Rashi say, definitively that he wasn't? Shmami Nashayu Nosim Kananiot. Yesh Lomar Rashi says no. Dilel Ma'arikigon Uma Acheret Shabal Kananit. There, what he means that yes, they may have been half Canaanites, but they weren't full Canaanites. The male, the father of whoever their wives was a non-Canaanite, Shabal Canaanite, who married a Canaanite woman. The Otabat Eino Canaanite, the daughter is not considered a Canaanite. Dochim Achara'av. Among the Goyim, among nationality, follows the father, not the mother. Okay? Avol Khan. So that's in the case where he says before. Avol Khan here, EF Shalafarish came. I can't explain that case here because why it doesn't say but he sees a daughter he sees a Canaanite woman. It says Bash each Canaani. Here it says she's the daughter of a Canaanite man, which means if she's a daughter of a Canaanite man and the genealogy follows the father, then wait a minute, then she's a Canaanite. Then it doesn't work. The Haksiv ish Kanani, Mashnisha ish haya Kanani. That's why Rashi is forced because he doesn't want to accept the fact that the tribe that Yehuda would have married a Canaanite woman. He is forced to say that Kanani here is not meant in the sense of Canaanite. It's meant in the sense of tradesman. By the way, we do have that elsewhere, specifically in the piyut that we say Friday, that some people say every Friday night when they get home. In Shalom Aleichem, it says, she gives a belt to who? Not to a Canaanite, but to a tradesman or to a merchant to sell for her. So again, we have precedent that the word Kanani also means something other than Canaanite. This is not the only place in Tanakh. However, I will tell you that I did a quick survey. The word Kanani appears 158 times in all of Tanakh, and over 150 of them are referring to either the land of Canaan, the Canaan, the person who was the son of Noah, or Eretz Canaan, or some Yishuv of Canaan, or a king of Canaan, or some other type referring to Canaan, the locale, the place that we're living right now as Canaan. So that's the general usage. The exception is when Kanani means tradesman. So very different. But anyway, but Rashi here says this is an exception to the rule. Now, then we get to the second wife. Now, the second wife of Yehuda, if you think about it, Yehuda has 3 sons with his first wife. She dies. Then he has two more sons that are listed here, the twin sons that are born with Tamar. So who is Tamar? Where does she come from? We don't have any clue to her genealogy whatsoever. Where is she from? But Rashi says that she was Bito Shel Shem. She was a daughter of Shem. By the way, Sifsei Chachamim says she'd have been Shem's daughter. She would have been pretty old at this juncture. Okay, but What he means is lavdaf gabito. Doesn't mean necessarily his daughter, but it means a descendant of. Shem farmeit Yaakov nun shana. Shem had died many years before. Shem died when Yaakov was 50. If you do the mathematics, Yatohu Yotzim ben Kuf Yud. Now he's already 110 plus. So she would have been at least 60 plus years old. She wasn't marrying him yet, but Elam and Mishpachtov. It means that not necessarily a direct daughter, but a descendant of Shem. So he married somebody who was not from Canaan, who was from Shem, descended from Shem. So again, we see the importance here that Rashi focusing on the fact that we shouldn't think that Yehuda married a Canaanite woman. Very important for Rashi to establish that. And again, the rationale being, hey, this is who we are. If we are, if all the tribes married Canaanite women, then why are we any different than any other nation? So that's the point they want to make, is that we all married, all the married people who were descended from Shem. Excuse me, somebody, Yitzchak Maron, please mute.
One box and putting things in another box.
Yitzchak Maron, please put yourself on mute. Thank you. Okay. Okay. Ramban goes into this very, very detailed explanation, which is, again, we've seen a lot of it before, but let's quickly go through it. Amram plus Tigra.
I'll put in a packet for you.
I apologize because I've got to stop this for a minute. Okay. That's where we were. Okay. Onklus. Ramban quotes Onklus, who says the same thing that Rashi just said. Tigra, Kolomar, as if to say, Ish Socher, he was a trader. Shabala Burbi Eretz Iskorato, because of his business. Business brought him here. He came to live here. He was not a native. This Chira. Vidato Lomar, and his intent, again, as we just said, is Kibnei Yaakov Yishtamru Milisa Kananiot. The Bnei Yaakov were very careful not to marry Canaanite women. Kasher Tiva Avram Yitzchak Gam Avihem Gam Avram Avihem that Yaakov command the Yitzchak and Avram had both commanded. The Chanis Kir B'Gemara B'Sachim Gemara says that all of them married non-Canaanite women. Now, interestingly enough, Ramban says, who are their wives? Hayunasheim Mitzriyot, Ammoniot, Moaviot, Umiyuchse B'nei Yishmael B'nei Keturah. That they married from the other Abrahamic or Terach tribes. They except Mitzri. Mitzri is also, I don't know why he puts Mitzriot in here. That doesn't make sense, because Mitzri are also descended from Cham. But again, they're different because Canaan is specifically cursed by Noah. That's why they wanted to avoid Canaaniotes. I suspect that they wouldn't have married Mitzriot either. Ammoniot, Moaviot, Yuchse b'nei Yishmael b'nei Keturah. That's what Ramban wants to suggest. Therefore, specifically in the case of Shaul, who was Shimon's son, it says Shaul ben Kanaanit, he was the only one who was ben HaKanaanit. The Gamsham Darsha Shedina, there's also, the Gemara wants to try to establish, the Parshanim want to establish that it wasn't really a Canaanite also there, because again, we want to remove the fact that any of the Jewish people were descended directly from Canaaniot. Rabotenu Nechluku b'davar. The Chazal argue, and he quotes what same medrash that Rashi quotes. Rabbi Yehuda Tomot Noldu Hashvatim and Nasum. Each of the tribes had a twin sister, and that's who the tribes married. Rabbi Nechemi Omer Kananiot Hayuvi Tachein. But I want you to understand, Ramban says, Shlohik bid Rabbi Nechemi b'Yuchsin. Rabbi Nechemi didn't mean Kananiot, that they came from Canaan. Shlonit Kavne Alomer Shenasu Nishei Eretz Canaan. What he means is that they married other women who were living in the land of Canaan. That's why they were called Canaaniot. Not that they were descended from Canaan, but they lived in the land. In other words, just like I would call somebody American or Canadian or whatever, not necessarily because they were native, but because they were living there at the time. The whole intent of Abraham when he tells his servant not to take a wife for Yitzchak from the Canaanite, Rak lachlok al Rabbi Yehuda. In other words, Rabbi Nechemiah's whole intent is only to say, I disagree with Rabbi Yehuda that they shalom nasu achioteim, that they didn't marry their sisters. Why? Why would Rabbi Yehuda have thought it was okay for them to marry their sisters? Only a maternal sister is asur for Noah. Why is that? Because generally among Bnei Noach, even though you think you may know who the father is, until you do that paternity test, you have no idea who the father is. The reality is we don't really know. So therefore, the only case where you can prove somebody is a sister is when they both come out of the same womb, physically. Not necessarily at the same time, but they're both born of the same mother. So among Noachites, when we say that you're not allowed to marry a sister, it's only a maternal sister, not necessarily a paternal sister. So therefore, and Raman's going to now say, Yehuda, according to Yehuda, who says that each one had twins, Yitzrachu b'nei Leah, let's say, Tumot Shisha Cherim. The 6 daughters of Leah would have married the 6 sons of Leah would have married the 6 twins of the other 6 sons. And vice versa. Oh, but according to Rabbi Nechemia, there was no twins at all. Yaakov had 1 daughter called Dinah, and that caused him enough headaches. He didn't need any more daughters. However, Ramban says, I have to agree with, my logic tells me that I have to agree with those that say there's no way they could have married descendants of Canaan. Because that would mean that Avraham, that Canaan, who was cursed by Noach, would have been the descendant of the Jewish people, ultimately going to inherit Eretz Yisrael. The Torah tells us many times that we have to ostracize and eliminate all the Canaanites. That they should have no remnant left. So clearly, according to Ramban, it's very clear that there's no way that Yaakov's sons could have married Canaanite women. Therefore, I have to say that he was some kind of traitor. I'll give you another reason. Ramban says, how do I know that he was a traitor? Why, if he's a real Canaanite, why does the Torah even have to mention that he's a Canaanite? Who else would be living in the neighborhood? Because all of the indigenous people at the time who were living in Eretz Yisrael were descendants of Canaan, or they were all called Canaanites, regardless of whether they were also Yevusites or Girgashite, whatever it was. All of them were under the single umbrella of Canaanites. The Adulam, the Eretz Canaani, and Adulam is a city in Canaan. So if he was an Ish Adulami, we would assume he was a Canaanite. The fact that the Torah had to say Canaani, then it would have had to, it's to teach us something, that he wasn't a Canaani in the sense of a Canaanite, but he was a Canaani in the sense of tradesman. And if in reality he was a Canaanite dweller, Canaanite descendant, here he took a wife, here was her name, why does it specifically mention the daughter of this Canaanite man? What does that mean? He was not a dweller of the land. That's why it says she's the daughter of a Canaanite man or of a tradesman. Because he married her because he knew her father. They would call him a tradesman, so she was the daughter of a tradesman. That's why he dwelt there, because he knew the trade. That's why Yehuda wanted to interact with him and trade with him. All right, we're going to skip the rest of this later than I thought already, and I want to get to some other things. So I'm just going to go very, very quickly to the end of the Ramban. He says, similarly, Tamar was not a native Canaanite woman either. She was one of those who dwelled in the land. Lobat ish Kanani b'yichusa. Ki chalila sheyeh Adonenu David u'Mashiach tzidkenu sheyigal alanu b'meira b'yameinu. It is impossible, Raman said, that we should think that David and the Mashiach should be descended from Canaan, who was called Arur. I was saying when he quotes the same Midrash that Rashi quoted Tamar was the descendant of Shem. Period. Okay. Now the Orach Chaim gives another reason. How do I know that this is not intended to mean Nani? That it doesn't mean Canaanite, it means tradesman. And again, brings the same thing, Per Socher, and he brings down Ibn Ezra. Okay, but why is it Ve'ilu haya Kanani mamish? If her father had been a Kanani, and Yehuda did something inappropriate by marrying a Canaanite woman, had it meant that she was a Canaanite, it would have called her a Canaanite, daughter of a Canaanite, or a Canaanite woman, and her father was Shua. It wouldn't say the daughter of a Canaanite whose name was Shua. It would have said she was a Canaanite woman whose father was named Shua, like it does with Esav and all the others. The Ein Bazeto Savateva, and it wouldn't add any words, and therefore it's very clearly in Gil Mizrach, because it's very clear the fact that the Torah specifically calls her a Bat Ish Kanani, that she was not a Canaanite herself, and that's exactly what the Ohr HaChaim wants to do. Okay, enough with the daughters, but it's interesting. I'm just going to close with the fact that other than Yehuda's two wives, who we read about just now, Yosef is the only other one whose actual wife we know anything about. The others we know nothing about, whether, again, as it's like Rabbi Yehuda said, they were twins, whether it's like Nechemia said, they were other inhabitants of the land. We'll find out when Mashiach and Eliyahu come, and we'll ask him, who were the wives of the Shvatim? But other than, as I said, other than Yehuda's two wives and Yosef's wife, who we read about next week, that's it. Those are the only ones mentioned at all. Okay. Now I want to go back to, as I said at the beginning, I want to focus on what is this chapter doing here out of context. It completely disrupts the whole flow of the Yosef story, and the question really is it in chronological order, and that's why the Torah puts it here? Or is there some other lessons that we're supposed to be learning by the fact that this whole story is seemingly out of place or interrupting? Yes. Absolutely. Yes. Yeah, David pointed out very simply that obviously this story is not something that happens in between. The whole story can't happen before Yosef's story continues, because we go through a number of different generations with Yehuda. Basically, he has a child. The child is old enough to get married, dies, and then he has another child. So yeah, there's clearly a time lapse, and we're going to get into that perhaps if we have enough time. We're going to get into the time lapse and how everything plays out. But it's interesting because not only does Yehuda have Onan, Shelah, Peretz, and Zorach, Peretz already has children by the time they descend to Egypt. When we count the 70 people who go down to Egypt in 2 weeks, 2 of them are Peretz's son, Chetzron and Chamul. So we got another generation born already before they go to Egypt. So that's going to put a very, very strict time limit on how long this story takes and where it is in conjunction with the Yosef story. But the real question, as I said, the question the Parshanim are trying to wrestle with is, why specifically here do we interrupt right after the sale and before Yosef gets to Mitzrayim? Why do we interrupt with Yosef's story, with this story? Rashi starts very directly with the question, Lava Nismach Parsha Zulikan. What is this story doing here? What is the reason? The Hifsnik Parshat Toshel Yosef. It comes as a complete interruption into the story of Yosef. Seems very straightforward question. Now Rashi gives one answer, which is quoted from the Midrash. L'lamed, it comes to teach us Jehoridu echav migdulato kisharau b'tzarat avihem. When they saw the distress that Yehuda's suggestion, by the way, it's Yehuda who suggests to the brothers, let's sell him. And when the brothers see how much this suggestion, that what they carried out, brought to fruition, how much chagrin it caused their father, they said to Yehuda, that was terrible advice, man. You're not a good leader. Forget it. What are you doing leading us? Let's find somebody else. That advice just wasn't it. Amru, they said to him, you were the one who gave us the advice to sell him. If you'd have told him, okay, let him go home, we would have listened to you. Now, and Rashi says By the way, it's interesting because in the verse there are two verbs. There's Vayered Yehuda me'et achav, he goes down from among his brothers. Vayet, and he turns. Now Rashi says Vayet, and he turns means me'et achav also. That he left the family for a while. He goes away from his brothers because they obviously weren't that happy with him at this point because of his advice. Ibn Ezra basically asks the same question, but he doesn't ask it directly, he just answers it. This story did not happen. Yehuda does not go and get married after Yosef was sold. The story begins, at least the first part of the story, Yehuda getting married, happens before Yosef is sold. How do I know that? And he brings other examples in Tanakh where it gives a story as though it's happening now, but it's already out of chronological order. And therefore, if we know a general principle, when there's a story in the Torah that's out of chronological order, there's a specific lesson that it's set to teach us. The Lama Hiskir HaKosazor Parshma comes there. So what's it doing here? The next pasuk after the sale of Yosef multiple times should have been that he gets to Egypt, and that's what happens to him in Egypt. So why is this here? Lafrish ben Maser Yosef ben Davar Eshet Adonav Maser Achiv. It is to separate between what happened to Yosef and his and Potiphar's wife from the events that happened with his brother. That there are two different stories, and he wants to separate them in terms of giving Yosef a chance to, I guess, recover and think about what's going on. Why am I forced to say that this is out of chronological order? But here's the reason. The entire time from when Yosef is sold till the Jews go down to Egypt with Yosef, because Yosef revealed himself, is a total of 22 years. Now, Vinay Nolan Onan Shusheni Livnei Yehuda. Now, if we go back, if we assume the number, how long it takes for this whole story to take place, let's figure it out. He said, we know that Onan is the second of Yehuda's two sons. The Gadol Adshalo Shahayi Elozera, and he was old enough to father a child, because the Torah says, well, he didn't want to father a child. If he hadn't been physically able to father a child, Torah wouldn't have made a big deal about it. Hashem wouldn't have said anything in fact he was not physically able. So obviously he was physically mature enough to father a child. The lo yimate pachot miyud beit shana. And Ibn Ezra's opinion, established medical opinion at his time, was before the age of 12, child is not sexually mature enough to produce a child, a male. The ode, and then even after that, so even if we assume it's already 12 years have already gone by, because Onan has to be old enough to father a child before any of this happens. The ode by Yirbu Yamim, and then what does it say? There was a lot of years passed. Begam Harta Tamar, and then Tamar gets pregnant, Volida Peretz, and then he first gives. So then, then Peretz, who Baal Mitzrayim Yesh Lo Shnei Banim. Peretz already had two sons by the time they got to Egypt. So clearly, if Onan had to be 12, and then sometime elapsed until Peretz is born, and then he grows up, so he's 12, that's got to be already 24 years, and he already has children. So again, it can't possibly have happened within a 22-year time span if we have to wait till each one is 12 years old, and plus had to be at least 13 years because he was the second child born. Even assuming that she got pregnant the day Yehuda got married, the day they got married, she got pregnant with the first one. She would have been the second year till she got pregnant with the second child. He has to grow up to be 12, and then we need another 12 years for Peretz to grow up old enough to have children. So that's what Ibn Ezra says couldn't possibly happen. It had to happen out of order, and the reason it's there is to separate between what the brothers did to Yosef and what Potiphar's wife story with Yosef. Radak says exactly the opposite. Doesn't ask the question. He gives the same answer. He gives similar answer to Rashi. No. Achar shenimkar Yosef. Yehuda, the whole Yehuda story starts after the sale of Yosef. Wait a minute. You just told me the 20 years. We're going to see that. Amro Vayered. Why does it say, if that's the case, why does it say Vayered Yehuda went down? Why? Because Dotan is the north, Adullam's in the south. He was traveling from north to south for whatever reason. It seems very, very ancient already, the concept that maps were drawn north to south, even in people's minds. Not necessarily, they weren't necessarily drawing them on paper, but people said, okay, if you're going south, you're going down. You're going north, you're going up, you're going right, you're going east, you're going left, you're going west. That because everybody assumed, again, the compass, you're always standing, facing north. Why? I don't know. I have no idea where that convention comes from, but it seems to be an established custom. And that's why when you're going from Dotan Ladulam, you're going south, it's Yerida. However, he also quotes, Radak also quotes, Yosef, the same thing that Rashi just quoted, Bereshit Rabbah. Why is it that this parsha is here? Like why is it here? Bereshit Rabbah, Radak quotes Midrash that says, Rabbi Elazar Omer Kedei Lismoch Haker Na LaHaker Na. We are very much, the Torah wants to have two stories right next to each other of somebody who is asking somebody to recognize something. What is the two stories? One is Yehuda tells to his father, Haker Na Hakitonet Bincha Ilo, recognizes this Yosef's coat or not. And therefore Tamar says to Yehuda, recognize whose signet and staff this is. So these two stories have to be juxtaposed one to the other. I think what Radak is trying to say here, very simply, is he's saying that this whole story is really part of Hashem's retribution to Yehuda. That Tamar is kind of payback to Yehuda. Interestingly enough, when the brothers when the brothers take Yosef's coat, whose blood is on it? What do? They slaughter, it says, a gedi izim. They slaughter a kid, a goat, a baby goat, a kid, not a child, a baby goat. Okay, gedi izim. What does Tamar ask you? What does Yehuda say he's going to pay Tamar with? A gedi izim. Wait, we go back a further step further. What did Yaakov use to deceive his father? What did his mother put on his arms to make her think, Yitzchak think that Yaakov was hairy? Gedi izim. So what goes around comes around. Okay, that's what Rabbi Elazar is trying to say. Haker no la haker. Okay, so that's another reason why these stories. Shar gives a slightly different twist to why Yehuda goes amongst his brothers. Now remember, we said before that the brothers saw the trouble it caused his father. Here it says no. Kivin shara atzaro shel aviv. Yehuda saw the trouble that he had caused his father. Ubechiotav, and the fact that his father was weeping over Yosef. Lo hayalach olisbol. He couldn't take it. Upirish mi beit aviv umeachav. He voluntarily left on his own, not because the brothers told him to leave, not because of anything else, but he felt he couldn't face it. He wasn't ready to face his own self. In other words, his conscience was bothering him, very, very simply. Okay, similarly says like B'chor Shor lo hayachol lispol tzaro shel aviv, and that. But then he also quotes Rashi, how we do migdulato, that the brothers weren't able to withstand that. And that's why it says Klomar al Yideachav, that it was the brothers, the way the brothers reacted to their fathers was what caused him to leave. Okay, now he's going to go into the whole chronology. The Im Tomer, you want to say this story is in chronological order. We just said it's only 22 years. Uktiva Yibua Yamima Tamat Batshua, the Achakach need Abra Tamar, the Yolda parrots the Zarach, parrots Holinet Chetzvam Chamul, Kodum Shiur Mitzrayim. How can we have all of these gaps and lapses happening in a 22-year period? It doesn't work. How can that possibly be? Chizkuni gives it different. Now remember, Ibn Ezra says based on that, has to be that part of the Yehuda story starts before the sale of Yosef. Chizkuni says no, not necessarily. Tshuva ledavar ain't litmawa al kaf. We shouldn't ask the question on this. Why? Shari dorot harishonim hayumolidim l'sheva shonim. Earlier generations became sexually mature at earlier ages. At the age 7, they were already sexually mature. Therefore, they were able to produce all this many generations in a 22-year time span. As we say in Seder Olam, Ketzad, how does that work out? How do we figure out all these generations being born in a period of 22 years? Years, what happened? She had one son. She had Er, she had Onan, she had Shelah. First 3 years. Higdil Er, so Er took 7 years to grow up. Zayin Shanim and Asa Tamar. So in the 8th year, remember, Tamar Er is born after year 1. When he's 7 years old, he's married off to Tamar. Hare Shmona Shanim. So it's now 8 years into our 22-year period. So it's Shmona Shanim Mishayaret Yehuda Ad Er Rava Yinuteo. Or Er gets killed. Shanat Chi'id in the 9th year, Nasa Onan, Ubota Shamei. 9th year, she marries Onan and he dies. Shana Asirit in the 10th year, Altal Gidol Shiloh. Shelah still hasn't grown up yet. It takes another year for him to grow up. So in year 10, since he was born in year 3, year 10, he's old enough to get married to Tamar. She wants to know, wait, why hasn't he been given to me? What's going on? So in the 11th year, when his wife died, Vayirbu Hayamim, and she sees Shegad al Shelah, Velo Nasa Vayugad the Tamar, Avevar Levatarla. So in the 11th year already, Tamar becomes pregnant with the twins. Shna Shemes also Libur Peretz Zarach. In the 12th year, she's pregnant with Peretz and Zarach. Shah Peretz Sheva Shanim and Nasa Isha. He gets married after 7 years. Teshat Reishanam Yisharat Yudah. So it's only 19 years. So he could have had kids already. See, he was married already 3 years by the time they go to Egypt. Could certainly have had kids, no problem. You see, if you cut 12 down to 7, it works very quickly, very easily. You can get generations very quickly. Okay, so the point being that, again, whether this story happened before or after, either way, by the way, if Yosef is 39, none of the brothers are that much older. So the fact that Yehuda already has gone through another generation, has great-grandchildren already, or grandchildren already from his later sons, is not so impossible. Shna Asim Los Liburo Shel Chetzron, V'Shna Asim Achad Liburo Shel Chamul, V'Shna Shtei Mitzrayim, Esmitayim Namul Chamul V'Yardu V'Chetzron Achavim Avot Tam LeMitzrayim. So his 2 children were a year and 2 years old, and they went to Egypt. Okay, so again, to go back, he goes through this whole, first brings the same reason that the others brought down in terms of why this story is here. Rabbi Chaim Paltiel gives very interesting discourse here. Okay. Lama nismechu parsha zulikan. What is this? Again, same question we started with. Why is this parsha here in the middle of the Joseph story? Ella, here's the real reason. Amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem says to Yehuda, "At achshav lo haya lecha tzar gidul banim." Up till now, you haven't had any kids. You haven't realized what it's like to raise children. You think it's a piece of cake raising children. You just go around and get rid of somebody's kid. You should have been very, very concerned what was going to happen to your father. You didn't think your father was going to be upset about the fact, well, he's got 11 others. Who cares whether he loses one? You should have been thinking, he says. So Hashem is really doing this. This whole chapter is here to show that Hashem wants Yehuda to think about what he's done. You are going to have to go through getting married and bearing children. Why? Because of what you did to your father. The Teda Tsar Gidul Banim, and you'll understand how much trouble it is to raise children. Then maybe you'll have a greater appreciation for what you've done. Okay. Okay. And then he goes through the same thing in terms of the 22 years, and but that's it. But I thought that's a very, very interesting thought here in terms of the fact that, again, it's Hashem is trying to wake Yehuda up to the gravity of what he's done. And we see perhaps as we go through the rest of the story and it plays out, we're beginning to see Yehuda's maturation as a person, as we go through the story of first the story of Tamar being able to stand up and accept responsibility for the fact that, yes, he is the father of these 2 sons. And later on, in terms of when he accepts responsibility for Binyamin, we see that he has done a complete reversal from where he was in terms of Yosef. when he gets to Binyamin. Okay. Okay. Sforno similarly follows similarly, but he says it much more succinctly and directly. Yes, I have to bring Sforno here. But Oto Hazman, Shenimkar Yosef Mitzrayim, same exact time that Yosef is being sold to Mitzrayim, Besibat Atzat Yehuda, Shamar Lamachro, because of the advice of Yehuda, who suggested to sell him. Omar Lashivo, and did not suggest, well, let's send him home. V'shachal et aviv, okay, and he caused his father bereavement. Chol al Yudah prima lalav, holichnei b'nei mavet. Therefore, he ultimately gives birth to two children who die. V'nisha shechul mishneim, and he is bereft of the two of them. Okay, and finally, we're going to go to Rabbeinu Abachai. Oh no, we're going to skip Rabbeinu Abachai. We're going to go back. Get back. We're going to go to the one more. Hamek Davar. Okay. Okay. Hamek Davar. It says it happened at this time. So in other words, he's saying that it has to be because the Torah doesn't just say after this it happened. Specifically at that time, the Torah is linking Yehuda's descent to that specific time. Uperish Rashi, that the brothers lowered him. So it seems from Rashi's comment, Netziv says, that the only connection between this story and the previous story is that Yehuda is lowered but from the brothers because of the advice he gave. But what about the rest of the story? Then it should have just said, period. And why do we have the whole story? And certainly, if we say that that Yehuda the story has to begin before Mechirat Yosef, okay. The Gemara's opinion is he brings proof from the Gemara that Yehuda was married before the sale of Yosef. Rashi didn't even address the whole question to 22 years and how they had so many generations within 22 years. That this whole story is related to the sale of Yosef and the timing of the sale of Yosef. Why is that important? This comes to prove the point that before problems come, Kodim Shenolad Mishabed Harishon, before the beginning of what is ultimately going to lead to the first exile, Nolad Goel Ha'acharon. The final Redeemer has already been born. So really the whole reason this story is here in the Tzif says is to connect Yosef going to Egypt to the birth of Peretz, who is the forebear of David and the Mashiach. What immediately precedes this? That Yosef is sold to Egypt. He's not. It was originally, brothers figured this was an Ishmaelite caravan. It was going off to Saudi Arabia somewhere. But no, it was going to Egypt, and ultimately Yosef gets sold into Egypt. Through this, we understand the connection between the two. Okay. Okay, let's go. Idan Adayan lo nitbar b'mar mishum b'leidat peret hanotzetzet mishiach yoter miYehuda be'atzmo. He still the Nesiv still is troubled by the fact, and he goes into more detail a little bit further above. I'm skipping right now, but he's bothered by why should the birth of Peretz as the ancestor of Mashiach be any stronger a connection to Mashiach than the birth of Yehuda? Why do we have to connect the birth of Peretz to the first Galut? Why? Because Yehuda was already born. What difference does it make? Because ultimately Peretz is a son of Yehuda. Yehuda is also a forebear of Mashiach. Why does the birth of Peretz have to be connected to this first exile? The reason is that Peretz represents breaking down the walls of nature. Because at his birth, if we go back to read the story, I skipped this detail till now. In the story of the birth, when the twins are born, it's interesting because this Zerach puts out his hand as if he's ready to come out first. The midwife ties a scarlet ring around a thread around his hand. Okay, but then the hand gets pulled back in to the womb, and Peretz pushes through. And what does that mean? This was already a symbol that he was going to be the progenitor of the king of the royal family, because the royal family, the king, has a right to knock down things that are in his way when he's marching off to do things. When he's going to carry on the country's business, he has a right. He doesn't have to worry about. He has the eminent right of way. He can do whatever he wants. He needs to be Yevamot, as we have in Yevamot. The whole story there with David HaMelech after he kills Goliath. Shaul is asking, who is he descended from? Is he descended from Peretz or Zarach? If he's descended from Zarach, I don't have to worry about him being a rival to the throne. But if he's descended from Peretz, I'm in deep trouble. That's exactly what Shaul says at that point, although I paraphrased the Gemara a little bit. But it still wasn't certain, okay? That's no guarantee that he's going to be the ancestor of Melech HaMashiach. Just like Peretz shows that he's ready to march forward, Peretz represents the spirit, the natural spirit, the spiritual values of the Jewish people. Generally, we know, because he, by being this powerful one, he is proving that the relationship between his mother and his father was a perfectly legitimate relationship. It was not a one-night stand. Because normally, when you have parents who sin, it means the kids are going to be sinners too. But the fact that he is so strong in his belief, in his amunah, in Hashem, that already is why Peretz is the one who becomes the symbol of Mashiach. And that's why, as we say, if we think about it, when we say it in L'chadodi, Ish ben Partzi, who are we talking about? We're talking about none other than Melech HaMashiach, who has come from Peretz. It's not just that he physically breaks down barriers, but spiritually breaks down barriers, as David with his Tehillim does. And considering the Melech HaMashiach, it tells all these things that he will be imbued with the spirit of Hashem, and he brings a whole bunch of other proofs. But anyway, the point here is Amek Davar says that the whole purpose of this story here is very simply to remind us that no matter what troubles we find ourselves in, no matter what galut we find ourselves in, Hashem has prepared the ultimate redemption. That it's here, it's waiting for us, it's ready for us, it can come at a moment's notice, and that's what we are praying for, that Hashem should send us the Mashiach b'mehera v'yameinu. And thank you all. I hope at this point I'm going to open up for questions, comments, and feedback. Hope all that was followable. Any questions or comments? Okay, I want to wish everybody a Chanukah Sameach before we close, and a Shabbat Shalom, and a good rest of the week. Next week, please watch your email, because it's going to be a last-minute decision as to whether there will be a shiur. As of now, we don't have any party planned for Wednesday evening, so the shiur will, B'ezras Hashem, take place. Although, as I said, I don't know. Rhonda's still planning for Hanukkah as we speak, so it's entirely possible that we will take a week vacation, but I will try to keep people posted. So have a happy Hanukkah, and we'll see you, B'ezras Hashem, either next week or the following week. Laila Tov and Chanukah Sameach and Shabbat Shalom. Bye-bye.
Chanukah Sameach, Shabbat Shalom.
Laila Tov.
Laila